time for Solamo.
And today we are going to discuss key events and ideas in Australian self-government and democracy. That's Chapter 7, Unit 5 on your book, on pages 298 to 301. And at the end of this lesson, you will be able to examine events and ideas in the development of Australian self-government and democracy. Second, recognize Commonwealth Franchise Act of 1902. And finally, explain the factors that contributed to the development of democracy in Australia. Now, let's have a short review before we start with our new lesson. There are 3 questions and you have 15 seconds to answer this. And time starts now. Okay, now let's check your answers. For number 1, in 1900, what percentage of the Australian population live in cities larger than 2,500 people? And the answer is letter C, that's 52%. Great. Number 2, what were the major causes of death for Australian women between the ages of 15 to 44 in 1900? The answer is letter A, childbirth and tuberculosis. Number 3, why did wealthy people move out of the city centers of Perth and Melbourne? And the correct answer is that's letter B, because of lack of available land and housing. Good job. Next, for numbers 4 to 6, you have another 15 seconds. And 15 seconds starts now. Okay, now let's check your answers. So which one was not an impact of the physical growth of Perth? And the correct answer is letter A, the end of bubonic plague. Okay, next, number 5. What types of transport did people use during the 1800s and 1900s? And the correct answer is letter B, horses, bicycles, and trams. And number 6, what was the most popular religion in the 1900s in Australia? And the correct answer is letter A. Well done. Now let's move on. Okay, for the last 2, you have another 15 seconds. Okay, now let's check your answers. What did the Victorian Education Act of 1872 establish? And the correct answer is letter C. Okay, free government-funded schools. Okay, next. Number 8. What sport did only wealthy people play in Melbourne and Perth? And the correct answer is that's letter D, tennis, croquet, golf, and polo. Good job. So again, today we're going to talk about key events and ideas in Australian self-government and democracy. Okay. During the 1800s, influential political ideas that first appeared during the 18th century in Europe and America were debated in colonial Australia. So these ideas would shape and influence the political culture and institutions of the Australian colonies. And among the ideas debated by enthusiastic colonists were egalitarianism, liberalism, and socialism. And I know you already have background information about these political ideas. So, can you identify the words or political ideas being described in each number? Okay, so let's see and check. For number 1, it refers to equal opportunity for citizens of a country. So it's equality, fairness. That is what we call egalitarianism. Okay? Next, number 2. This is the promise of improved conditions for working class people through an increased role of the government. So the role of the government is important here, most especially in the economy and society. That is what we call socialism. So the opposite of socialism is capitalism. So socialism is public ownership. Okay? Next, number 3. The widespread acceptance of freedom of speech, the press and religion in society, and the protection of individuals in the privacy of their homes. So the keywords here, freedom of speech, press and religion in society. So that is what we call liberalism. Okay, well done. Next. Another political ideas were representative democracy, Chartism, and nationalism. So the inclusion of representatives of eligible voters in the political decision-making process is what we call representative democracy. And the features of Australian colonies that made them distinct or different from other nations in the world is what we call nationalism. And Chartism, a series of democratic reforms arising from the 1838 People's Charter in Britain. So that is Chartism. So in general, democratic reforms are changes that are made to a country's system that allow it to become more democratic. So let's say, for example, a reform that allows people to vote when they were previously not allowed to vote is a democratic reform. Okay, so again, Chartism is a series of democratic reforms or changes arising from the 1838 People's Charter in Britain. Okay, so let's talk about this. So again, it's a political movement in Britain associated with the People's Charter published in 1838. And the charter called for 6 essential political changes or reforms. So first, all men over the age of 21 would be given the right to vote. So that is what we call universal male suffrage. Second, a secret ballot or private vote would be used during elections. So maybe to protect men from being bribed or bullied when they voted. Okay? Next, number 3. There should be no property or land holding qualifications to become a member of a parliament. Okay? And number 4, all members of the parliament should be paid. So if you're a member of a parliament, you will receive a salary or payment for that. And number 5, all electorates should be of equal size. And lastly, elections should be held every year. So the aims and values of the Chartism movement had a significant or important influence on the development of Australian political institutions and culture in the 19th century. Okay, now let's move on to colonial self-government. Okay, remember colonies were ruled by a governor, just like for example in Swan River Colony. The first governor was James Stirling, and the governor was accountable only to Britain. However, the political power of the governor changed during the 19th century as the colonies adopted or followed some democratic reforms and some separation from the British colonial office. So let's start from 1823 to 1839. So here, during this time, Legislative Council was appointed by the Governor of New South Wales to assist him to run the colony. That's in 1823. Then it was introduced to Van Diemen's Land, Swan River Colony in South Australia. Now, when we say legislative council, it's the organization or law-making body. They are the ones who make laws in the colony. Okay, next, from 1855 to 1859. So during the 1850s, all colonies, except for Western Australia, took control of their own governments. Okay, they were able to develop their own constitution and parliamentary system. So when we say constitution, that's a set of laws that governs a colony or a state or a country. Just like, for example, Philippine Constitution. Okay, so and parliamentary system is a system of government in which the power to make and carry out laws is held by a parliament or the country's law-making body. Okay? During the 1855 to 1859, colonies were able to develop their own set of laws and parliamentary system. So, Britain has a parliamentary system of government and it is one of the oldest in the world. So, the parliament consists of two houses, House of Lords and House of Commons. But in Australia, we call them Upper House and Lower House. So, most colonial parliaments consisted of two houses, the Upper House, which is called the Legislative Council, and the members here were selected by the governor, and a lower house, the Legislative Assembly. So members here were elected by citizens who held land and wealth. Okay, next. Each of these colonies achieved responsible government. And when we say responsible government, it's a government in which premier or the leader of the government and ministers ran the country and were responsible to the elected House of Parliament and could be removed by election if they do not please the voters. So again, it's a country run by the premier as the head of the government and assisted by ministers. So when we say ministers, that's a member of the government in Britain and other countries who's in charge of particular department or has an important position in it. So let's say, for example, the foreign minister, the health minister. Okay, from 1890 in Western Australia, because of its small population and the admission of convicts between 1850 and 1868, self-government did not begin in Western Australia until 1890. And the Proclamation of Constitution Act of October 1890 provided responsible government for Western Australia. And to Western Australian colonists, Proclamation Day on 21st of October 1890 was the real or true beginning of self-government in Western Australia. And its first election was held for the Legislative Assembly or the lower house in December 1890. Now let's move on to democratic reforms or changes that are made in Australia that allow it to become more democratic. So let's have fast facts first. So casting a vote is a very important act in a democracy, and you will notice that there are a number of ways of describing this in the English language. So let's have, for example, a vote is also called a ballot or suffrage and franchise. Okay? So in Australia, the secret ballot or private vote was originally used in the Victorian goldfields during the 1850s to protect men from being bribed or bullied when they voted. It has been called the Australian vote, and it fitted comfortably into Australian democracy and was more popular than voting by a show of hands, just like in ancient Greece. Okay? And most colonies conducted elections every 3 to 4 years. Okay, so this shows the progress of democracy in each of the colonies, and as you can see, voting rights for Both adult men and women began in South Australia, and also the use of secret ballot, while receiving payment or salary as members of parliament started in Queensland. Now, let's have voting rights for adult women. Now, universal suffrage was not achieved in Britain or the USA until after World War I. And when I say universal suffrage, that's the right of all adult men and women to vote. Okay? But the British suffragettes, or women who advocated or who fight for the right of women to vote, used mass rallies and vocal protests, fought a long battle with the government to achieve suffrage for women over the age of 30, and that was achieved in 1918. Most men in Australia over the age of 21 had the right to vote by 1900. But for women, between 1894 and 1908, the Australian colonies granted voting rights to women, and South Australia was the second place in the world after New Zealand to grant women the right to vote, but the first place in the world to allow women to stand for parliament or to allow women to become a member or elected in the parliament, as you can see in our source. So in South Australia, women granted the right to vote in 1894 and the right to stand or be a member of parliament also in the same year, and the first woman elected was in 1959. So, how did it happen? There were two significant or important individuals who fought for the democratic rights in South Australia. So they were Catherine Spence and Mary Lee. In 1894, they organized a petition comprising 11,000 signatures, which was presented to the Premier of South Australia, Charles Kingston. And the Australian Parliament passed a bill permitting the vote for most women aged 21 years and over. And in 1895, women in South Australia officially received permission to vote. And in 1899, Western Australia followed South Australia's lead and granted women the vote, and followed by other colonies. And the last one was Victoria in 1908. So in 1908, women in Victoria achieved the right to vote. Okay. Now, this is a very important event, the Commonwealth Franchise Act of 1902. This allows all men and women who were Australian citizens and over the age of 21 the right to vote in federal elections by the Commonwealth government. But anyway, Commonwealth government is a new government after the union of 6 British colonies. You will learn more about this in the next unit. Okay? However, equality and democracy were not meant for everyone in Australia. It's just for men and increasing number of women of British or European backgrounds. Why? Because many Indigenous and non-European people living in Australia were denied or were not allowed to vote in the new Commonwealth of Australia. As you can see in our source 5b, legislation to regulate Commonwealth voting rights and procedures, the Commonwealth Franchise Act 1902 specifically excluded or not included any Aboriginal native of Australia, Asia, Africa, or the islands of the Pacific except New Zealand from voting, unless they were actually on the roll before 1901. Okay. Now we're done with our discussion, so let's proceed to our first activity. So first, we want you to use information from this unit to construct a timeline from 1850 to 1910 to clearly show the following democratic reforms that took place in Australia. So you have 30 seconds to do this. And time starts now. Okay, now let's check your answers. So let's start with 1855 to 1859. So here, all colonies except Western Australia took control of their own governments. Okay, next. In 1900, most men in Australia over the age of 21 had the right to vote. And not only that, between 1894 to 1908, the Australian colonies granted voting rights to women. And in 1902, all men and women who were Australian citizens and over the age of 21 were given the right to vote in federal elections by the Commonwealth government in the Commonwealth Franchise Act. So, great time, good job! Now let's move on to our second activity. Can you still remember these political ideas? Okay, I want you to identify them in 30 seconds. And another 30 seconds for this. Okay, now let's check your answers. For number 1, that is what we call egalitarianism. Okay, next number 2, that's socialism. Number 3, liberalism. And number 4, that's what we call representative democracy. Number 5, nationalism. And number 6, that's Chartism. Well done! Now, for our third activity, I want you to use the following terms included in this unit to complete the paragraph below. So, let's start. In 1838, the People's Charter was published in Britain, and this document influenced democratic reform in Australia. And it recommended the use of private vote or secret ballot, which was first used on the Australian goldfields during the 1850s. And South Australia and Western Australia went further than the demands of the Charter by granting universal suffrage in 1895 and 1899. And some women had to wait until 1908 to vote in state elections, and ideas of liberalism motivated colonial governments to introduce reforms such as old age pensions and improved working conditions. So, we're done, and now for our summary, I want you to go through our summary slides. Okay, for the self-assessment section, I want you to tick the box which you think you can do and cross it out if you still have questions and try to review the lesson again.
Thank you for watching. I hope everyone is safe at home. See you soon!